My name is Natalie Mitchell, and I'm 28 years old. 3 years at Thompson Enterprises taught me something no business school ever could. Sometimes, the most powerful words you'll ever write are in your resignation letter. When I finally gathered the courage to quit, Frank Thompson actually laughed in my face. But that smug smile vanished the moment he read what I'd written. The letter wasn't just my exit, it was 3 years of meticulous documentation that would change everything. Before I dive into what happened next, drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from, hit that like button, and subscribe to see more stories of people finding their voice in toxic workplaces. Trust me, what happened after he read that letter was worth the wait. Walking into Thompson Enterprises for my first day felt like stepping into my dream future. The gleaming downtown Chicago skyscraper, the panoramic views of Lake Michigan from the 34th floor, the sleek modern workstations. It all screamed success. With my freshly minted MBA and a head full of innovative marketing strategies, I was ready to climb the corporate ladder. "Natalie, welcome to the team," Frank Thompson said, giving my hand a firm shake that first morning. He was imposing, 6'2", with salt and pepper hair and a tailored suit that probably cost more than my monthly rent. As the marketing director and nephew of the company's founder, Frank had a reputation for driving results. "We expect great things from you." I still remember how I beamed at those words. If only I'd recognized the warning signs that were already there, the tight smiles of my new colleagues, the subtle eye rolls when Frank turned his back, the hushed conversations that stopped when he approached. My cubicle neighbor, Jessica Parker, became my first friend at Thompson. She'd been there 5 years and knew the ropes. "Frank runs a tight ship," she warned during our first lunch together in the break room. "Just document everything. Trust me on this." I laughed it off. "I'm sure it's not that bad. He seems intense but professional." Jessica just gave me a knowing look and changed the subject. Within my first month, I witnessed Frank publicly berate an account manager for a minor error in a presentation. "This is kindergarten work," he shouted across the conference table. "Is this really the best you can do? Because if it is, maybe we need to reevaluate your position here." The poor guy looked like he wanted the floor to swallow him whole. "That's just Frank's way," explained Ryan Daniels, a competitive colleague who always seemed to position himself as Frank's right-hand man. "He pushes us to excellence. You'll get used to it." But excellence wasn't what Frank was pushing for, it was submission. I watched as he systematically took credit for his team's ideas during executive presentations. In meetings, he'd ask for input, then dismiss or belittle any suggestion that didn't align with his thinking. People learned to just agree with him. "Melissa in HR knows all about it," Jessica confided after I witnessed a particularly harsh dressing down of a junior copywriter. "But she's Frank's hire, so." I tried to excel despite the environment. I came in early, stayed late, triple-checked my work. For a while, it seemed to be working. My first performance review was glowing, with Frank noting my attention to detail and team player attitude. Then came the Parker Shoes account. The client was considering taking their business elsewhere after years of stagnant sales. I spent weekends researching their market, analyzing competitors, and developing a comprehensive rebranding strategy that focused on sustainability. Something their target demographic valued, but competitors weren't addressing. The morning of the presentation, Frank asked to review my materials. "Just want to make sure we're putting our best foot forward," he said with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. I handed over my carefully prepared slides and research. 2 hours later, I walked into the conference room to find Frank already presenting my presentation, my research, my ideas to the Parker Shoes executives. I stood frozen in the doorway as he flipped to my conclusion slide. "So as I've outlined in this strategy I've developed, sustainability isn't just a buzzword for Parker, it can be your competitive edge." The client loved it. They signed a renewed contract that afternoon. Frank received a company-wide congratulatory email from the CEO for his innovative approach that saved a key account. That night, I vented to Jessica over drinks at a bar near the office. "Welcome to Thompson Enterprises," she said, signaling the bartender for another round. "Frank's been doing this for years. Why do you think there's such high turnover in marketing?" I stared into my glass. But why does everyone put up with it? Chicago's marketing world is smaller than you think. Frank has connections everywhere. Cross him, and suddenly you're not a good fit for any position in town. She lowered her voice. Kelsey from digital marketing tried to report him last year. 2 weeks later, she was let go for performance issues. No one's heard from her since. I went home that night and updated my resume, but didn't send it anywhere. Despite everything, I still believed I could succeed there. I just needed to be smarter, work harder, find a way to get proper credit. I was wrong. For the next several months, I tried every approach. I sent email summaries after verbal discussions. I made allies with colleagues from other departments who could vouch for my contributions. I even tried addressing it directly with Frank during a one-on-one. I noticed the board seemed to think the Parker campaign was entirely your concept, I said carefully. I'd appreciate some recognition for my contribution. Frank's smile never faltered, but his eyes turned cold. Natalie, this is a team effort. No one succeeds alone here. If you're concerned about credit, perhaps you should focus more on being a team player and less on individual recognition. The next day, my workload doubled. Coincidence? Hardly. As my first year turned into my second, I watched the pattern repeat with others. Ryan thrived by becoming Frank's echo chamber. Talented people either adapted to the toxic environment or left quietly. Melissa from HR continued to offer empty platitudes about communication styles whenever complaints surfaced. I stayed because the projects were challenging, the pay was good, and frankly, I was too stubborn to let Frank win. But each day chipped away at my confidence and passion for the work. The enthusiastic, ambitious woman who'd walked into Thompson Enterprises was fading, replaced by someone who checked her email with dread and held her breath when Frank called her name. By the beginning of my third year, I knew something had to change. I just didn't know it would involve a 5-page letter that would wipe the smile off Frank Thompson's face forever. The incidents with Frank escalated so gradually that looking back, I'm amazed at what I normalized. It was like the proverbial frog in slowly heating water. By the time I realized how bad things had gotten, I was already boiling. February marked the beginning of what I now call the 6 months of hell. Our department was tasked with launching a new product line that could make or break the company's fiscal year. As the senior marketing strategist, I should have been central to the planning. Instead, Frank forgot to invite me to the initial strategy meeting. Oh, was that today? I overheard him tell Ryan in the hallway afterward. Make sure Natalie gets up to speed. She can handle the market research portion. Market research, the grunt work that should have gone to an intern. When I finally got the project brief, I discovered Frank had assigned me an impossible deadline, comprehensive market analysis for 5 competitor products in 3 days. Is this timeline realistic? I asked during the team meeting. Frank raised an eyebrow. Everyone else seems to manage their deadlines. If you're feeling overwhelmed, perhaps we should discuss your workload capacity. The implication was clear: complain and your competence will be questioned. I pulled 2 all-nighters and delivered the report on time. Frank's response? A cursory, looks fine email with no acknowledgement of the extraordinary effort it had required. The next week, I discovered my request for a research assistant had been denied while Ryan received approval for 2 new team members. Budget constraints, Frank explained with a shrug when I inquired. Yet somehow there was budget for a lavish client dinner where Frank presented my research findings as market insights he'd been tracking for months. March brought the quarterly performance reviews. Despite exceeding all my targets, Frank's assessment was tepid at best. You meet expectations, he said, sliding the form across his desk. But I'm concerned about your team integration. Several colleagues have mentioned you seem isolated. Who said that? I asked, genuinely shocked. I can't divulge confidential feedback, he replied smoothly. But as your manager, I recommend more effort in building relationships. Ryan, for example, has shown exceptional team leadership. The next day, Ryan was promoted to senior marketing strategist, the title that should have been mine based on our organization chart and my tenure. His desk was moved to the corner office, while mine remained in the high-traffic area near the break room, making focused work nearly impossible. By April, my exclusion from key meetings became blatant. I'd arrive at scheduled discussions to find decisions already made. "We had to move the meeting up," was the standard excuse. "Didn't you get my email?" Those emails mysteriously never arrived, or came after the rescheduled meetings had already occurred. When I did attend meetings, Frank developed a new tactic, asking me complex questions without warning, then cutting me off mid-answer. "We need concrete solutions, Natalie, not theoretical approaches," he'd say, then turn to Ryan. "What are your thoughts?" Ryan would then present ideas suspiciously similar to ones I'd shared in previous emails where Frank had been copied. By May, I started keeping a detailed journal of these incidents. Dates, times, witnesses, exact quotes. I wasn't sure what I'd do with this information, but documenting it helped me feel less crazy. Jessica noticed the small notebook I kept in my desk drawer. "Smart," she said quietly. "I wish I'd done that from the beginning." The physical toll became impossible to ignore. I developed insomnia, waking at 3 a.m. with my heart racing, mentally rehearsing meetings and responses to potential ambushes. I lost 12 pounds in a month without trying. My mother commented on how drawn I looked during our weekly video calls. June brought the annual client showcase, where I was scheduled to present our successful rebranding campaign for Meridian Software. The night before, I stayed until midnight perfecting my presentation, then arrived early to set up. At 9:50 a.m., 10 minutes before clients were due to arrive, Frank approached my podium. "Change of plans," he announced casually. "Ryan will handle the Meridian presentation. You'll take the Hartman account." The Hartman account. A minor client I had no involvement with. I had exactly 10 minutes to review materials for a project I knew nothing about. "This is setting me up to fail," I protested, keeping my voice low as executives began filing in. Frank's smile was shark-like. "It's testing your adaptability. A valuable skill in marketing, wouldn't you agree?" The presentation was a disaster. I stumbled through slides I'd never seen, unable to answer basic questions about strategy decisions I hadn't made. From the corner of my eye, I caught Frank and Ryan exchanging knowing glances. That afternoon, I went straight to HR and requested a meeting with Melissa. After 20 minutes of explaining the pattern of behavior, complete with specific examples from my journal, her response left me stunned. "It sounds like you and Frank have different communication styles," she said, her voice professional but dismissive. "Have you considered that you might be taking his feedback too personally?" "Frank has an excellent track record of developing talent." "This isn't about feedback," I insisted. "This is systematic undermining and taking credit for others' work." Melissa's smile didn't reach her eyes. "Without specific evidence beyond your perception, there's little HR can do. Perhaps you could work on being more resilient." I left her office feeling hollowed out. That night, I finally started browsing job listings. July brought the annual company picnic, where Frank publicly praised Ryan's extraordinary contribution to the Meridian campaign, my campaign. As colleagues avoided my eyes, I realized I had become what others feared becoming, the cautionary tale, the one being publicly diminished. The final straw came in August during a presentation to potential investors. I had prepared extensive slides on market expansion opportunities, only to watch in horror as Frank displayed an older version with incorrect data. When the investors pointed out the discrepancies, Frank turned to me. "Natalie is still learning attention to detail," he said smoothly. Fortunately, I caught most of these errors before today. As the room filled with uncomfortable silence, something inside me finally snapped. 3 years of diminishment crystallized into absolute clarity. Nothing would change as long as I stayed. No amount of excellence, documentation, or professional decorum would protect me from Frank Thompson. That night, I called Jessica. "I'm done," I told her, my voice surprisingly steady. "I can't do this anymore." "About time," she replied. "What's your exit strategy?" I didn't know it then, but my answer to that question would change not just my career, but the entire culture at Thompson Enterprises. The investor meeting debacle replayed in my mind all weekend. By Monday morning, I was physically ill at the thought of facing another day under Frank's management. I called in sick for the first time in 3 years. Everything okay? Jessica texted. Frank's asking where the Q3 projections are. The Q3 projections that weren't due until next week. The ones I'd already completed anyway, because I'd learned to work weeks ahead to counter Frank's sudden, urgent demands. I forwarded the completed report to Jessica with a brief message. Here. But I'm seriously considering not coming back. Her reply came minutes later. Call me after work. Don't do anything yet. That afternoon, I discovered something that transformed my simmering resentment into ice-cold resolve. While searching for a client email, I stumbled across a board presentation Frank had given the previous week. There, presented as his strategic vision for the coming year, was my research. The comprehensive innovation pipeline I developed and shared with him confidentially last month. The presentation even included my market analysis graphs, stripped of my name and rebranded with his. My hands shook as I forwarded the file to my personal email. 3 years of diminishment and theft suddenly crystallized into a single, clarifying thought. I wasn't just leaving Thompson Enterprises, I was going to hold Frank accountable on my way out. That evening, my mother called during her weekly check-in. You sound different, she observed. What's changed? I found myself pouring out everything, the stolen ideas, the public humiliation, the systematic undermining, the failed HR attempt. When I finally paused for breath, the line was silent for so long I thought we'd lost connection. Mom? I'm here, she said quietly. I'm just thinking about something my mother told me that I never fully understood until now. She said, how you allow people to treat you becomes the standard for how they'll treat you forever. The simple truth of it struck me like a physical blow. You've always been a peacemaker, Natalie, she continued. Even as a little girl, you'd give away your toys rather than cause conflict. That's a beautiful quality. But there's a difference between keeping peace and allowing yourself to be diminished. So what do? I asked, feeling suddenly very small. You set the standard, she said firmly. Not just for how Frank treats you during these last days, but for how you'll carry this experience forward. And maybe, just maybe, you set a new standard at that company for those who come after you. After we hung up, I met Jessica at a cafe several blocks from the office. The distance felt necessary, as if Thompson Enterprises might somehow overhear our conversation. I've been waiting 3 years for you to reach this point, she said after I explained my decision. The question is, how do you want to leave? What do you mean? There's leaving quietly, taking another job and giving standard notice. That's what most people do. She stirred her coffee thoughtfully. Then there's leaving in a way that might actually change things. I'm not interested in burning bridges, I said cautiously. This isn't about burning bridges. It's about documentation and accountability. Jessica leaned forward. You know what happens every time someone leaves because of Frank? Absolutely nothing. He finds another target and the cycle continues. Unless someone finally speaks up with evidence. My journal. The emails. The presentation theft. For 3 years, I'd been building a case without realizing its potential power. That night, I updated my resume and reached out to my network. Within 2 weeks, I had 3 promising interviews and 1 offer from Apex Creative, a respected competitor that had been trying to recruit me for months. But Jessica's words kept echoing in my mind. Was it enough to simply escape, knowing the toxic environment would continue for others? What about the next person Frank decided to undermine? What about Jessica herself? I began researching workplace bullying, finding studies that quantified its organizational costs. Decreased productivity, increased turnover, higher healthcare expenses from stress-related illness. The American Psychological Association estimated that workplace bullying cost companies millions annually in lost productivity alone. Next, I reviewed Thompson Enterprises' own policies on professional conduct and ethics. The employee handbook contained strong language about respect, integrity, and proper attribution of work, policies Frank violated daily. With growing certainty, I realized I needed professional guidance. I scheduled a consultation with an employment attorney, carefully bringing my documentation journal and key emails. This is Thorough, said Diane Lawson, ESQ, flipping through my materials. What outcome are you looking for here? I'm not looking to sue, I clarified. I already have another job lined up. But I want to leave in a way that might actually change the culture there. She nodded approvingly. Then what you need is a strategic exit. Your resignation letter becomes both documentation and catalyst. That night, sitting at my kitchen table with a cup of tea growing cold beside me, I began drafting what would become the most important document of my professional life. Dear Mr. Thompson, I typed, then paused. For 3 years, I had crafted careful, diplomatic communications designed to avoid conflict. This would be different. This letter would finally tell the truth, with evidence too substantial to dismiss. As the clock ticked past midnight, then 1, then 2, the letter grew from a simple resignation into a comprehensive account of systematic workplace bullying, complete with dates, incidents, and witnesses. I included links to studies on the organizational impact of toxic leadership and highlighted violations of the company's own stated policies. By dawn, I had a first draft that felt both factual and powerful. But as I finally fell into an exhausted sleep, I wondered if I would actually have the courage to deliver it when the time came. The first draft of my resignation letter ran 7 pages, too long and too emotional to be effective. Over the next week, I refined it with the precision of a surgeon, cutting unnecessary details while strengthening my core message. Attorney Diane Lawson's advice proved invaluable. Focus on patterns, not personalities, she emphasized during our follow-up meeting. And everything must be factual, documented, and relevant to company interests. I restructured the letter to highlight 3 years of specific incidents, each with dates and witnesses. Rather than emotional language about how Frank's behavior made me feel, I detailed the tangible impacts. Projects delayed when team members weren't properly informed, client confusion when presentations contained contradictory information, and the measurable cost of high department turnover. This isn't just about my experience, I wrote in the revised version. Thompson Enterprises has lost 6 talented marketing professionals in the past 18 months, an attrition rate of 42% compared to the industry standard of 17%. But evidence alone wouldn't be enough. I needed witnesses willing to corroborate my account. I'm thinking of documenting everything in my resignation letter, I confided to Jessica over lunch. Would you be willing to be named as a witness to some of these incidents? Her hesitation was brief, but noticeable. What exactly would that involve? Just confirming what you've seen if you're asked. I'm not asking you to file your own complaint or put your job at risk. Jessica stirred her salad thoughtfully. You know what? Yes. It's time someone did this. Count me in. To my surprise, when I discreetly approached 2 other colleagues, Aiden from digital marketing and Sophia from the creative team, both readily agreed to be named in my documentation. Frank changed the entire culture of our department, Sophia said quietly. I've been updating my resume for months. Remember Carlos from accounts? Aiden added. He didn't pursue other opportunities like HR claimed. He filed a complaint about Frank and was gone 2 weeks later. This new information sent me back to my letter draft with renewed purpose. If Frank's behavior had resulted in actual terminations of those who complained, the stakes were even higher than I'd realized. The real breakthrough came from an unexpected source. After a particularly tense department meeting where Frank had again taken credit for my work, I received an email from Arthur Wilson, a senior board member who had attended the presentation. Ms. Mitchell, I appreciated your insights today, though they seemed to be presented as Mr. Thompson's. I'd value a few minutes of your time to discuss the Westfield account approach in more detail. Our meeting was brief but revelatory. Without directly criticizing Frank, Mr. Wilson asked several pointed questions about the department's workflow and attribution practices. As I carefully described our process, his expression grew increasingly troubled. This isn't the first conversation of this nature I've had recently, he said as our meeting concluded. Thank you for your candor. That evening, I researched previous employees who had left the marketing department. Through LinkedIn messages framed as professional networking, I connected with 4 former team members. Their stories confirmed a pattern identical to my experience. I wish I'd documented everything like you did, wrote Tara Mason, a former senior copywriter. I just wanted to escape. With this broader context, I restructured my letter again. The final version began with a clear statement of resignation, followed by documented incidents organized by type. Credit appropriation, information withholding, public humiliation, and retribution for addressing concerns. I included an appendix with relevant company policy citations and research on the financial impact of toxic leadership, including specific costs associated with the department's high turnover. The letter concluded with constructive recommendations for improving departmental culture. Following Diane's advice, I prepared 4 copies. One for Frank, one for HR, one for the board, and one for my personal records. Each was placed in a sealed envelope marked confidential. The night before I planned to resign, I barely slept. Despite my careful preparation, fears crept in during the dark hours. What if this backfired? What if I was blacklisted in the industry? What if nothing changed? At 4 a.m., I sat up in bed and opened my laptop one last time. I added one final paragraph to the letter. I submit this documentation not out of malice or revenge, but out of commitment to the values Thompson Enterprises claims to uphold. The talented professionals who remain deserve leadership that empowers rather than diminishes their contributions. I hope this letter serves as a catalyst for positive change. As dawn broke over Chicago, I dressed with particular care. A charcoal suit that projected both professionalism and strength, subtle makeup, and the pearl earrings my grandmother had given me when I graduated from business school. For the days when you need to remember who you are, she'd said. Today was definitely one of those days. The morning of my resignation dawned with an unusual clarity. The Chicago skyline stood sharp against a perfect blue October sky as I rode the elevator to the 34th floor. My heart pounded so loudly I was certain others could hear it, but my expression remained composed. The sealed envelopes in my briefcase felt like they contained nitroglycerin rather than paper. The office buzzed with Monday morning activity. I nodded greetings to colleagues while following my carefully constructed plan. Deliver the letter early, before Frank could fill my day with urgent tasks that would make a private conversation impossible. Is he in? I asked Frank's assistant, Denise. Just arrived, she confirmed. Do you need a few minutes with him? Yes, please. She gave me a curious look. Direct requests to see Frank weren't common, but picked up her phone. Natalie Mitchell needs to speak with you. Yes, I'll send her in. Frank was standing behind his desk reviewing documents when I entered, his tailored suit immaculate as always. The corner office showcased panoramic views of Lake Michigan, artwork selected by a corporate designer, and golf trophies from charity tournaments, the carefully curated environment of a man who valued appearances above all. Natalie, he said without looking up. If this is about the Westfield campaign adjustments, I've already decided to go with Ryan's approach. Of course he had. Ryan's approach that was, in fact, originally my approach with a few superficial changes. Actually, I said, my voice steadier than I expected, I'm here to submit my resignation. That got his attention. Frank's head snapped up, his expression cycling quickly from surprise to calculation to a smug smile that made my stomach clench. Resignation? That seems rather dramatic. He leaned back in his leather chair. If this is about the Westfield campaign. It's not about any single incident, I interrupted, something I'd never dared do before. I've accepted a position with another company. His smile widened, taking on a decidedly condescending edge. I see. And where might that be? I'd prefer not to say at this time. He chuckled, an actual laugh that made the hair on my neck stand up. Well, these hasty decisions rarely end well. I suppose we can discuss a 2-week notice period, though I must say, leaving in the middle of the Q4 planning shows a concerning lack of professional commitment. The familiar tactics, questioning my professionalism, implying deficiency in my character rather than acknowledging legitimate concerns, only strengthened my resolve. I've prepared a formal letter, I said, withdrawing the sealed envelope from my briefcase and placing it on his desk. Frank barely glanced at it. Yes. HR will process the standard exit paperwork. Though I should warn you, Natalie, the marketing community in Chicago is quite small. Professional bridges once burned. The threat was thinly veiled, but I was prepared for it. Without responding to his intimidation attempt, I gestured to the envelope. You may want to review the letter now. It contains important information about my resignation and my experiences in this department. Something in my tone must have registered because Frank's expression shifted slightly. He picked up the envelope, tore it open with theatrical nonchalance, and began to read. I had imagined this moment for weeks, yet nothing prepared me for the reality of watching Frank Thompson's face change as he processed my words. The transformation was remarkable, like watching a mask dissolve in real time. The smug smile vanished first, replaced by a slight furrowing of his brow. By the second page, his complexion had paled noticeably. By the third, a muscle twitched near his jaw. When he reached the section detailing the Meridian campaign theft with supporting emails and witness statements, his hands began to tremble almost imperceptibly. "What exactly are you playing at?" he finally asked, his voice low and dangerous as he reached the final page. "I'm not playing at anything," I replied calmly. Every incident described in that letter is factually accurate and documented. As noted on page 5, copies have been delivered to Melissa in HR and to the board's ethics committee this morning. That wasn't entirely true. The other deliveries were scheduled for immediately after this meeting, but Frank didn't need to know that. He slapped the letter down on his desk, color returning to his face in angry blotches. This is nothing but a vindictive attempt to damage my reputation. Typical behavior from someone who clearly can't handle high-performance environments. No one will take these absurd accusations seriously. I had anticipated anger, perhaps even yelling, but Frank's immediate pivot to discrediting me was still jarring. For a moment, familiar doubt crept in, the same doubt that had kept me silent for 3 years. Then I remembered the documented evidence in the letter and found my voice again. "The board has already expressed concerns about department turnover," I said quietly. "And there are multiple witnesses to each incident I've described. This isn't about vindictiveness, Frank. It's about accountability." His eyes narrowed dangerously. "Do you have any idea what you're doing to your career with this stunt?" One call from me to Joel at Apex Creative, my sharp intake of breath betrayed me. I hadn't told anyone except Jessica about my new position. Frank's smile returned, predatory now. "Oh yes, I know exactly where you're going. Chicago is indeed a small community. Joel and I golf together monthly. How unfortunate it would be if he heard about your difficulties with management." The threat hung in the air between us. This was the moment that would define everything. Would I back down as I had so many times before? That would be retaliation, I said, meeting his gaze directly. Which would only validate the concerns raised in my letter. "And I suspect Joel would be very interested in why you felt the need to interfere with his new hire." Something shifted in Frank's expression, a flicker of uncertainty. Before he could respond, his phone buzzed. "What is it?" he snapped at the intercom. "Melissa from HR is calling," Denise's voice replied. "She says it's urgent." Frank's eyes darted from the phone to me, comprehension dawning. The other letters had already been delivered by courier, as scheduled. "Tell her I'll call back," he said, then jabbed the button to end the connection before Denise could respond. "You've made a serious mistake," he said, standing abruptly. "I'm going to give you one opportunity to retract this creative fiction before it goes any further. We'll call it an emotional overreaction, perhaps discuss a different position within the department." "No," I interrupted, also standing. The single word felt like breaking through a wall I'd been pushing against for years. "I'm not retracting anything, and I'm not accepting a different position. My resignation is effective 2 weeks from today, as stated in the letter." Frank stared at me as if seeing me for the first time. The silence stretched between us, taut with 3 years of suppressed confrontation. Finally, he reached for his phone again. "Denise, get Melissa from HR up here immediately. And contact legal." Without waiting for a response, he turned back to me, his expression now carefully controlled. "You may return to your desk until HR arrives. Don't discuss this matter with anyone." "Actually," I said, gathering my briefcase, "I've taken a personal day today." Everything I'm currently managing is documented in the shared drive, and I've prepared transition notes for each active project. I'll return tomorrow to begin the handover process. This small assertion of control, deciding my own schedule after years of having it dictated, felt unexpectedly powerful. As I turned to leave, Frank called after me, his voice deliberately casual. "You know this won't end the way you think. No one succeeds by challenging the established order." I paused at the door and looked back. Frank Thompson, who had loomed so large in my professional life, suddenly seemed diminished behind his expansive desk, a man whose power existed largely through others' fear of confronting it. "Maybe not," I acknowledged. "But some things are worth doing regardless of the outcome." With that, I walked out of his office for the final time, back straight and head high. As I passed through the department, colleagues glanced up curiously. Some would soon be reading their own copies of the letter excerpts I'd placed in sealed envelopes on their desks, not the full documentation, but enough to understand what had been happening and why I was leaving. The elevator doors closed on the 34th floor, and I finally allowed myself a deep, shaky breath. 3 years of accumulated tension began to dissolve, replaced by a sensation I hadn't experienced in too long. The simple, profound relief of having finally spoken my truth. The 24 hours following my confrontation with Frank passed in a surreal blur. I spent the remainder of that Monday alternating between adrenaline crashes and anxious phone checks, half expecting to hear my job offer had been mysteriously rescinded. By evening, my phone buzzed constantly with text messages from colleagues. "What happened?" Jessica wrote. "Frank's been in with HR and legal all day. He looks like he's about to explode. Is it true you documented everything?" This from Aiden. "People are saying you sent proof to the board." "Whatever you did, thank you," wrote Sophia. "Meeting with marketing got cancelled because Frank was unexpectedly detained." I responded cautiously to Jessica, but avoided engaging with the office gossip. This wasn't about creating drama, it was about accountability. Still, I couldn't help feeling a twinge of satisfaction knowing Frank's day had been as disrupted as the countless days he disrupted for others. Tuesday morning arrived with leaden dread in my stomach. Walking back into Thompson Enterprises felt like returning to the scene of an accident. The marketing department hummed with unusual tension, conversations dropping to whispers as I passed. My desk appeared untouched, exactly as I'd left it. At 9:17 a.m., my phone rang with an internal number I didn't recognize. "Natalie Mitchell," I answered professionally. "Ms. Mitchell, this is Patricia Dawson from Human Resources." "Not Melissa," I noted. "Could you please come to conference room C at your earliest convenience?" "Of course." "Is this regarding my resignation?" A slight pause. "We'd like to discuss your letter, yes." Conference room C was the small, windowless room used for sensitive conversations, terminations, disciplinary actions, and, apparently, resignation debriefings. I gathered my notebook and phone, ignoring the curious glances from nearby colleagues, and made my way there with measured steps. Inside waited not just Patricia, but also an older man I recognized as Jeffrey Harris, Thompson's general counsel, and a woman I'd never met who introduced herself as Vanessa Torres, VP of Human Resources from the corporate office. "No Frank. Interesting. Thank you for joining us, Ms. Mitchell," Vanessa began once I was seated. "We've reviewed your resignation letter and the accompanying documentation. I want to assure you that Thompson Enterprises takes these allegations very seriously." Jeffrey Harris cleared his throat. "Before we proceed, I should clarify that this meeting is not an admission of liability regarding any claims in your letter. We're simply gathering information as part of our standard exit process." The corporate attorney's speak didn't surprise me. "I understand," I replied. "To be clear, I haven't made any claims requiring liability consideration. I've simply documented my experiences as context for my resignation." Patricia slid a folder across the table. "We've prepared the standard exit paperwork. Your last day will be October 15th as requested." I glanced through the documents, standard confidentiality reminders and benefit information, but stopped at a form titled Separation Agreement. "This includes a non-disparagement clause," I noted, scanning the dense legal text. That wasn't part of my employment contract. Jeffrey shifted uncomfortably. It's standard exit procedure. Perhaps, I acknowledged, but I won't be signing anything beyond what's required to process my resignation and benefits. I haven't disparaged Thompson Enterprises, nor do I intend to. My letter documents specific behaviors by a specific manager, not general complaints about the company. The three exchanged glances before Vanessa leaned forward. Natalie, may I call you Natalie? We appreciate your professionalism in this matter. The detailed nature of your documentation has raised concerns that warrant further investigation. This was unexpected. I had anticipated dismissal or minimization, not acknowledgement. We'd like to ask you some follow-up questions about certain incidents you've described, she continued, particularly regarding the Parker Shoes and Meridian campaigns. For the next hour, I walked them through the timeline of events, referring to emails and meeting notes I'd documented in my journal. They asked pointed, specific questions that suggested they were taking the matter seriously. You mentioned Carlos Rodriguez in your letter, Patricia said near the end. Could you elaborate on his situation? I only know what colleagues shared, that he filed a complaint about Frank and was terminated shortly after. That was before my time. Vanessa made a note. And you've stated that 3 other employees are willing to corroborate your experiences? Yes, I confirmed. Jessica Parker, Aiden Novak, and Sophia Chen have all witnessed the behaviors I've described and have agreed to be contacted. As the meeting concluded, Vanessa handed me her business card. If you think of anything else relevant to our investigation, please contact me directly. Investigation. The word hung in the air as I gathered my things. They were actually investigating. Back at my desk, I found an email from Arthur Wilson, the board member who had noticed Frank's pattern of credit appropriation. Ms. Mitchell, it read. I've reviewed your letter to the board's ethics committee. Thank you for your courage and thoroughness in bringing these matters to our attention. Would you be available for a confidential conversation later this week? The email confirmed what I'd suspected. Arthur's earlier questions hadn't been random. The board was already concerned about Frank's management before my resignation. That afternoon, as I began organizing transition documents, Jessica stopped by my desk. HR just called me in, she whispered. They're asking about Frank. You don't have to say anything, I reminded her. This isn't your battle. Jessica straightened. Actually, it is. It's all of ours. I'm tired of watching good people get crushed while Frank fails upward. I've been here 5 years, it's time I spoke up too. By Wednesday, the office dynamic had shifted noticeably. Frank was conspicuously absent, with an office-wide email simply stating he was out of the office on business. Ryan, his usual ally, looked increasingly uncomfortable as multiple team members were called to HR throughout the day. That evening, my phone rang with an unknown number. Natalie? This is Tara Mason. We connected on LinkedIn about Thompson Enterprises? The former copywriter I'd contacted while researching previous employees. Yes, of course, I replied. Thank you for calling back. I just got off the phone with your HR department, she said. Apparently, they're investigating Frank's management practices and found our LinkedIn messages. I told them everything, how he took credit for my tagline campaign, how he scheduled me for client presentations then excluded me at the last minute. All of it. They contacted you directly? This was more thorough than I'd expected. Not just me. They mentioned speaking with several former employees. Whatever you put in that resignation letter, Natalie, it opened the floodgates. People are finally talking. Thursday morning brought another surprise. An email from Melissa in HR announced she would be pursuing other opportunities effective immediately, with Patricia handling HR matters in the interim. By Thursday afternoon, Frank's absence had become the subject of intense speculation. The official line remained out on business, but department heads were now reporting directly to the CEO for urgent matters, a temporary restructuring that spoke volumes. I maintained my focus on documenting projects and preparing handover notes, determined to leave everything in impeccable order. This wasn't about burning bridges, but building new foundations. Friday morning, I received a call from Arthur Wilson. Ms. Mitchell, thank you for agreeing to meet. I'll be direct. The board has reviewed your documentation along with additional information gathered this week. What you've brought forward aligns with concerns we'd begun exploring after noting unusually high turnover in marketing. He paused. 3 previous employees filed complaints about Mr. Thompson, but none with the level of documentation you provided. Without concrete evidence, each situation was dismissed as a personality conflict. That's what HR told me too, I noted. Yes, well, it appears our human resources department had developed certain blind spots. That's being addressed. Arthur's tone conveyed more than his diplomatic words. The board is implementing a comprehensive review of management practices across all departments. As I prepared to leave the office that Friday, my first week of resignation nearly complete, Jessica caught me at the elevator. They've placed Frank on administrative leave, she whispered. Just announced to the department heads. Pending a thorough investigation of management practices. The news should have felt like victory, but what I felt was more complex, relief mixed with validation, and an unexpected sadness for what these 3 years could have been under different leadership. What about you? Jessica asked. Any regrets about leaving? I thought about my new position at Apex Creative, starting in just over a week. A clean slate. A chance to work in an environment where my contributions would be valued. No regrets, I said honestly. But I'm glad I didn't leave silently. That weekend, for the first time in months, I slept without waking at 3 a.m., my mind no longer racing with strategies for navigating Frank's next power play. Whatever happened next at Thompson Enterprises was no longer my battle. But I had given others the ammunition to fight their own. The second week of my notice period brought an unexpected twist. On Monday morning, an email arrived from Kenneth Thompson, the company president and Frank's uncle. Ms. Mitchell, I'd appreciate the opportunity to speak with you personally regarding your resignation. Would you be available for lunch today? My first instinct was anxiety. Was this an attempt to pressure me into retracting my letter? A final power play from the Thompson family? But curiosity won out, and I accepted the invitation. Kenneth Thompson was nothing like his nephew. Where Frank was slick and performative, the elder Thompson was understated and direct. He selected a quiet corner table at an upscale restaurant near the office, ordered quickly, then got straight to the point. I owe you an apology, Ms. Mitchell, he began, surprising me immediately. What you experienced under my nephew's management represents a failure of leadership. Not just his, but mine as well. I wasn't sure how to respond, so I simply waited for him to continue. Frank was placed in his position before he was ready, at my sister's insistence, he admitted. I knew there were issues with his management style, but I didn't realize the extent until your letter forced a closer examination. It wasn't just about me, I clarified. Multiple employees experienced similar treatment. Kenneth nodded grimly. Yes, the investigation has made that abundantly clear. 7 former employees have now come forward with corroborating accounts. He took a sip of water, looking suddenly older than his 60-something years. I'm not here to ask you to withdraw your resignation. Based on what you've experienced, I wouldn't expect you to stay. But I am here to ask for your input on how we can prevent this situation from recurring. My input? I echoed, genuinely surprised. You had the clarity and courage to document what others simply endured. That perspective is valuable. For the next hour, we discussed concrete changes Thompson Enterprises could implement, anonymous feedback channels that reported directly to the board, regular review of department turnover statistics, clear attribution policies for creative work, and a restructured HR department with direct lines to senior leadership. As lunch concluded, Kenneth made an unexpected offer. We would welcome you back in a senior position, reporting directly to me, if you'd consider it. Your marketing insights are exactly what the company needs. The offer was tempting, a chance to return vindicated, to help implement the very changes I'd advocated for. But I thought about the fresh start waiting at Apex, the opportunity to build my career without the shadow of these experiences. I appreciate the offer, I said sincerely, but I think it's better for me to move forward with my new position. However, I'm happy to provide any additional insights that might help you implement positive changes. Kenneth nodded, seeming to have expected this answer. The door remains open, should you ever reconsider. And I hope you'll allow us to use you as a professional reference in the future. That afternoon, I received an official company-wide email announcing Frank's departure to pursue other opportunities, the same euphemism used for so many of his targets. The marketing department would undergo restructuring under interim leadership while a search commenced for a new director. The news spread quickly. My phone buzzed with messages from colleagues expressing everything from shock to vindication. Jessica called the moment she read the announcement. "You did it," she said, her voice tinged with disbelief. "They actually fired him." "We all did it," I corrected her. "Everyone who spoke up during the investigation. But it started with you. With that letter." My final days at Thompson Enterprises passed in a blur of transition meetings and exit interviews. I was meticulous about documenting ongoing projects, determined that my departure wouldn't disrupt the department's work. Professional to the end, despite everything. On my last day, Jessica and a group of marketing colleagues took me out for farewell drinks. The mood was celebratory but bittersweet. To Natalie, Jessica toasted, raising her glass. "Who taught us all that documentation is power?" I laughed. To speaking up, I countered. "Even when your voice shakes." The following Monday, I walked into Apex Creative for my first day, the Thompson chapter officially closed. Or so I thought. 2 weeks into my new position. Where my ideas were credited, my input valued, and my manager actually listened, Jessica called with an update. "You're not going to believe this," she began. "They've restructured the entire marketing department. Ryan's been demoted back to account manager, and guess who they just promoted to team lead?" "You," I guessed, smiling. "Me. And that's not all. They've implemented a new attribution policy for all creative work. All presentations must clearly credit contributing team members. They're calling it the Collaborative Credit Initiative, but everyone knows it should be called the Natalie Mitchell Rule." I laughed at that, but felt a warm glow of satisfaction. Sometimes change did happen, even if you weren't there to see it. Over the following months, I heard periodic updates about Thompson Enterprises. Melissa never returned to HR. Instead, the company hired an experienced HR director from outside with a background in organizational psychology and conflict resolution. The marketing department's turnover rate dropped dramatically under new leadership. As for me, the psychological scars of those 3 years didn't heal overnight. I started seeing a therapist to process the lingering effects of workplace bullying, the self-doubt, the anxiety, the tendency to over-document even the most basic interactions. Recognizing these patterns was the first step toward changing them. 6 months after leaving Thompson, I received an unexpected LinkedIn message from Kenneth Thompson. "The changes you helped initiate have transformed our culture. Turnover down 40%, productivity up, employee satisfaction scores at a 5-year high. Your impact continues." I showed the message to my therapist during our session that week. "How does that make you feel?" she asked. I considered the question carefully. "Validated," I finally said. "But also sad that it took something so dramatic to create necessary change." "That's often how systems work," she noted. "They resist change until the cost of maintaining the status quo exceeds the cost of transformation." My letter was that tipping point, I realized. "Your documented truth was," she corrected. And that's the real lesson here. In the year that followed, I found myself informally mentoring others facing similar situations. A friend's sister dealing with a boss who took credit for her work. A former classmate navigating a toxic team environment. I never suggested everyone should leave with a 5-page documentation letter. Each situation was unique, but I did emphasize the importance of maintaining clear records and honoring one's own experience. "The key isn't just documentation," I would tell them. "It's believing that your reality matters enough to document." 18 months after leaving Thompson Enterprises, I was invited to speak at a professional conference on building healthy workplace cultures. Standing at the podium looking out at hundreds of attentive faces, I felt a momentary flash of imposter syndrome. Who was I to speak on this topic? Then I remembered the journey that had brought me here. From the eager MBA graduate who silently endured mistreatment to the professional who finally found her voice through careful documentation and strategic action. Workplace culture isn't created through mission statements or company retreats, I began. It's built daily through hundreds of small interactions that either value or diminish people's contributions. And changing a toxic culture doesn't require grand gestures. Sometimes, it starts with simply writing down what's happening, clearly and factually, until the pattern becomes impossible to ignore. After the presentation, a line of attendees waited to speak with me. One woman, about my age, clutched a notebook tightly against her chest. "I started documenting last week," she told me quietly. "After 3 years of just taking it. Your story gave me permission to trust my own experience." Driving home that evening, I reflected on how differently things might have gone had I never written that letter. Frank would likely still be in his position, continuing the cycle of taking credit and diminishing others. I might still be there too, my confidence and creativity steadily eroding under his management. Or perhaps I would have left quietly, carrying the unresolved weight of those experiences to my next position. Instead, I had discovered the power of documented truth. Not just in creating external change, but in validating my own reality when others tried to distort it. That was perhaps the most valuable lesson of all. Our experiences matter, our truths deserve to be recorded, and, sometimes, the simple act of putting pen to paper can transform not just a workplace, but ourselves. That night, I opened my laptop and began drafting an outline for a book, Documentation is Power: How to Recognize, Record, and Respond to Workplace Bullying. If my story could help others find their voice sooner than I found mine, then every difficult moment at Thompson Enterprises would serve a greater purpose. I often think about what my mother said during that pivotal phone call. How you allow people to treat you becomes the standard for how they'll treat you forever. By refusing to accept Frank's treatment any longer, not just by leaving, but by documenting and exposing the pattern, I had set a new standard, not just for myself, but for an entire company culture. Have you ever faced a situation where you needed to stand up for yourself at work? What gave you the courage to speak up, or what held you back? Share your experience in the comments below. Remember that your story might be exactly what someone else needs to hear to find their own voice. Don't forget to like this video, subscribe to see more stories of workplace transformation, and share with someone who might need this message today. Thank you for listening to my journey, and remember, your truth matters, and, sometimes, documenting it is the first step toward positive change.